Welcome to my advanced Angular tips video tutorial. My name is Sean, known as Born to Net, and in this video tutorial I'm going to cover some of the really cool things that you can do with Angular. Now keep in mind this is an advanced tutorial. I expect you to know Angular already, so if you are just starting out, this is probably not going to be the video for you. This is my GitHub repo, and the four projects that I'll be mentioning in this video are going to be the Studio Dashboard, the kitchen sink mostly, which I'll show you in just a sec, ngSkeleton, which is a really great project to get started. If you're just starting and looking for a seed project, this would be my recommendation, using ngrx and a lot of other really cool stuff, and as well as the ngMSlib. So all these projects I'll be talking about in this video. So if you check out the Angular kitchen sink, you can see that I'm talking about hundreds of different tips in this particular repo, and I'll be covering some of these tips in this video tutorial. If you go into the project, and you can see the example of the kitchen sink project in action. If you go to over here to, for example, notes 3, you can see that I have a lot of very cool examples on different things that you can do with Angular, dynamic component creation, and a lot of really good stuff. So again, I'll be covering some of this in this video tutorial, but I do recommend you just jump into the code, into the different examples, search for a particular string, for example, for this string inside the code, and then you'll be able to find this particular component and see what I do there. Studio Dashboard, another project I developed. This is a major project, hundreds of components. So if you're looking to look at an enterprise level Angular application, definitely something that you can fork. It's open source and you can check that as well. And a lot of the source examples in this video are going to be referring to code from Studio Dashboard. ngMSlib, I'll be talking about this library as well in this video, and you can check it out in this repo. And last but not least is the ngSkeleton, which is my favorite seed project. So if you want to just really very easily start a new Angular project, I recommend you just seed this one, and you can see it in action. It has a full login mechanism. It supports two-factor authentication. So you can see right here that I can go over here and support sliding. These are all pure Angular components. You can see that as I change the size of the application, it's responsive, so the menu changes. If I scroll further down, so all in all, just a really cool application that you can seed off of, and just a nice way to get started with Angular. I wanted to give a special thanks to digitalsignage.com, free digital signage for everyone, for allowing me the time to prepare this video and all the effort that I give back to the Angular community. Angular community is awesome, and I love giving back to the community. If you guys are interested in free digital signage, definitely check it out. Awesome product. You can put public screens and remotely web manage them from anywhere. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the code. So often we'll extend CompBaser with most of my components, and it gives me a few helper methods, one of which is cancel on destroy. And cancel on destroy allows me to simply put a wrapper around any function or method that I want to automatically dispose of when this component gets destroyed. This way I don't have memory leaks, I don't have to remember to run unsubscriptions. And so you can see over here I'm listening to an ngrx store, and over here I'm also listening to an ngrx store as well here through a user model. Over here I'm actually listening to the activate route for the router events. So anything that you want to listen to, any type of function that you want to run, you simply run it in cancel on destroy. And then instead of using the ng on destroy like you normally would, you simply use destroy, which gets called at the end of life of this component. And if you want to look at the code, if I go ahead and jump into CompBaser, you can see that ng on destroy gets overridden and I simply unsubscribe. So it's a really nice helper method that I recommend you use just to plug those memory leaks when you're disposing of components. So one trick that I often use is to actually display the component name inside the view inside the UI when I'm developing. Of course, you don't want this in release, only when you're developing. So I'll go ahead and log into my application, switch over here to the module, and you can see right here that I'm in debug mode, and I can actually see the component name. So you see right here add network package editor, and over here you see the add network target, and there's really hundreds of these, so it makes it really convenient to see which component I'm working on. So if I come back to the code in 6 months, I can just go into debug mode and I can see right here, and okay, well this component, I want to work on it, so I know which component that is. So it's really convenient. If I go to the release version of this application, you see that I actually don't have the component name, and I can actually just put in a real string or nothing at all. So you still have the option to just put in a real string or nothing at all. So how do I accomplish this? I have a base class in all these components that I want to be able to do that. So you can see right here, this in this base class, I have this string called, or rather a member called me. So what I do is I run this get component selector method, which is part of my base class comp baser. So obviously I'm going to want to extend this class comp baser for any of the components that I want to use this functionality. So you can see right here that if I'm in development mode, I actually put class debug and I show the string me, which gets taken from my base class. So let's go ahead and actually go into this. So you can see this is the ed network package editor. You can see right here that it extends my comp baser, therefore it gets the me value from the base class. And you can see that I use this me value, but only if I'm in development mode. In release mode, I actually show a different string. So this is how I'm able to actually swap these in and out. Of course, you can do it with a CSS selector as well. You don't necessarily have to use the ngIf. I just find it a little bit easier. And here's the real nice part of this trick, is that I don't even have to pass in the component name. So if I change the component name, the component's name is actually retrieved using reflection. So you can see right here, all I do is I just pass in the constructor and I'm able to actually get the component name. So I don't have to bind to a particular component name. All I have to do is just use the string me, and it automatically picks up the component name via reflection. Now keep in mind, this might not work in AOT, so it's only for JIT, but when you're in development anyways, you're in JIT, so it doesn't really matter. For the next tip, I wanted to show you that you can actually use pipes directly. So obviously you know that you can use pipe in templates, but you know that you also can use the same pipes directly inside the controller. So over here I'm using the date pipe, which you can again of course use in the template, but you can just simply call a transform on it, which is just a regular function, and then you give it the same arguments that you would normally give it in the template using the colon selector. And then over here you can see that I'm simply printing out the format. You have all the benefits of the pipes, but you can use it programmatically. Now, still on the subject of pipes, if you're not familiar with this particular project, I recommend you check it out. This is called Angular Pipes, and it gives you a whole bunch of extra pipes that you can use. So just a big shout out for this developer, kind of putting all these different Angular pipes that you can use directly in an NPM package. For the next trick, I'll show you how I manage forms that have a lot of different fields. So you can see right here, I have a whole bunch of fields right here, and the goal of this trick really is that when I'm getting data back from the store, I don't want to go and deal with each one individually. Now this is a reactive form, so I'm not using the ng model, so I have to go and set each value into the form. So what I do is I simply use the form builder reactive method, and of course you'll just do all your validation and all that good stuff over here, but you can see I have a lot of different fields. And if I go ahead and switch into my template, you can see that I reference these fields in my template right here. But again, the key is that when I get the data back from the store as an update, as an observable, I want to automatically update all the fields, and I don't want to deal with each one individually. That's just too much work. So what I do is I simply do a for each loop, and what I do is I assign him to a local member form inputs, which is nothing more than just a regular object. But you can see right here that I assign him to this object, and the key, or really the important thing, is to use the same key, the same field name over here for the form input as you do in the store. So it's really easy to map the two. So again, the store value that you're going to put in your ngrx or your Redux store has to match the same field that you actually named your input with. And if the two match, then it's really easy to simply map one-to-one. And so this trick really shines right here, where I see where I do right here the render form inputs. All I have to do is you can see I simply listen to updates from the store. Let's go ahead and show you that. So I listen to updates from reseller white label, and when these updates come in from the store, I simply go over here and I render all the updates. I do a for loop on the model, and you can see that I can even get rid of this to simplify, and simply I do a set value. So I don't have to go ahead and deal with every single field. I just do a for loop, and this trick really saves me a lot of time. Again, this is useful if you have form with a lot of different fields. For the next tip, I wanted to show you this getters and setters. So anytime you use a template, you want to try and at least use as much as you can getters and setters instead of methods. So you can see right here in my template, in my input for the value, I'm using actually this counter value. And if I jump into it, you can see that this is a getter and a setter, of course. Why do you want to use a getter or setter? Because if you do that, the framework would not going to have to check as often if the value changes. If you do a regular method or a function, you see, like if I do it right here, what's going to happen is that the framework is going to say, well, okay, this is a function, I don't know what it's going to return, so I actually have to go and run it and see what happens, what does it actually evaluate to. So again, by just using a getter and setter, this becomes essentially just a member. Always try and use getters and setters rather than full method names possible. Now there may be scenarios where you can't, because you actually have to pass in some argument, and if you do, then you really don't have a choice and you actually have to use a function. But if you don't, getters are going to help you out. The next thing I wanted to show you is the devtool extension for Redux. So if you use ngrx or Redux, I highly recommend that you use this tool right here. It's really awesome, gives you time travel so you can go back and forth. You can actually see all your actions being dispatched, and if you're using effects, you can see that as well, all the side effects. If I actually open it up a little bit more, you can see right here that I can look at my state of all the application. You can actually see it as it's changing in real time, so you'll see all your data changing. I'm using immutable.js, so I have this wrapper right here, but just really awesome stuff. Definitely recommend that you guys use that if you use Redux. You can also look at the raw data right here. You can see that just look at the raw JSON data. Comes highly recommended. Chrome extension, devtools for Redux. Now you will need to enable the plugins. So you can see right here I'm using ngrx. So I'm using store devtool module, and I'm enabling it through the instrument only with extension. There's the equivalent call for Redux. Just remember to install this and also configure it in your actual app module as well. The next tip is just for Windows users. So sorry Mac guys, but you probably already have your own tools. So if you are a Windows user, I highly recommend use cmder plus cygwin. You can see right here, this is cmder, this is the website cmder.net. I highly recommend you install it. It's an awesome utility for Windows. Also cygwin gives you the goodness of Linux in Windows. And you can see right here, this is just, I couldn't say enough good things about it. So you can see right here, so I'm using all the awesomeness of Linux in my Windows, so I can do all the regular commands that you would expect. Still use git and npm, everything just through a much nicer Linux type console through cygwin. And also you can see the shell is cygwin, so it just gives me a really nice interface. I can also open more terminals that I can just continue and divide the screen up to more and more subdivisions like this. So just makes it really convenient. Just a really nice tool. Cmder plus cygwin. Windows environment, you gotta get this stuff. The next thing I wanted to talk about is dependency injection, but this time I want to talk about dependency injection in respect to the UI. So often I read articles online on dependency injection, they're always talking about services. So because just I keep on reading about it, I think maybe some people are just not aware that you can also do dependency injection on UI, which is actually even more powerful. I want to make sure that everybody's aware of that. So over here, for example, you can see that I have tab and it's under tabs. The tab would go ahead and register itself with the tabs. So if I jump into the tab, you'll see that what I do over here through dependency injection, I simply grab the tabs, its parent, using the host. So it's only going to look at its host element and grab the tab using dependency injection, and simply what I do is I add myself this to my parent, so the parent is aware of all of its children. And you can see over here under add tab, I just keep track of my tabs and I can set the active. So for those of you who are not aware, dependency injection also works at the level of the UI, not just as services, which makes it really powerful. And there's a whole bunch of these tags. There's host, there's a self, there's a whole bunch of them optional, so you can set dependency injection with different criteria. For the next tip, I wanted to talk about just debugging either ngrx or Redux. So what I normally do is actually register just an empty reducer. I call it notifier, and you can see right here that if I switch to my project, you can see that I register this notify reducer, and this notify reducer is just really easy to implement. It really has very low code, and you can see that when I enable this, I simply see all the actions that are dispatched to the store, so I can see them in the console. So I use that sometimes to debug and look at the flow of things. Now of course you can also use the plugin, the devtool Chrome extension, but if you want to see it in real time, you want to see it during development at the console, this is really useful. When I'm debugging ngrx or React RXjs, normally it's hard to see or be able to put breakpoints, especially if you're dealing with multi-sequential streams. So what I normally do is I just put the debug like this, and what I do is I just hang off the chain, prototype chain of the observable custom command called debug, and you can see that over here I can just type in the message. I put observable debug, I for information, E for exception, C for complete. Console devtools, you can even add colors to it. You can see right here, which makes it really convenient. And the best part is you can actually put breakpoints. So you can put breakpoints in your stream flow and follow this. Just remember to add a declaration, otherwise TypeScript will be mad at you. So make sure that you let TypeScript know that you've added this new debug command off the prototype chain of the observable. You can just all day long just put in debug messages, even pass in values, and just put in breakpoints. So really useful when you're debugging RxJS. So when I started working with Angular CLI and Webpack, I assumed that anytime there was an error, I just had to look at the stack trace and figure out where it's coming from, and that wasn't always very useful. So actually that's not the case. If I put here foo, which doesn't really exist, you can actually follow the bundle that gets created, and often you'll see a stack trace that kind of matches your code, and you can figure out where the error is coming from. So I'll go ahead and show you. I just put in a foo here, which obviously is going to generate an exception, and you can see right here that there's an exception, and in this case it's pretty useful. I can see that the login panel is causing it, and okay, I can kind of figure out where it is. But if you don't see the class name or the module name, always try and go into the bundle. Often you'll find information that will be very useful. Although this is not exactly my code, I mean, you can see that things have been added here. It resembles close enough that I can tell kind of where it's coming from, and you can see the function name. So always follow the bundle if you can't figure out from the stack trace where's the exception coming from. So the next tip I wanted to talk about is creating custom components that are going to be fully compatible with your Angular forms. So you can see right here I got my input numeric, and this is just my own custom component. However, it's fully compatible with both reactive forms as well as model type forms. So I can use the ng model and so on, and I can create any type of behavior that I want. So in this case I have a max value, a minimum value, I have the text holder, I can round up, and so on. So this is just your own custom component. However, it'll still work with validation, so the form will either be valid or invalid, taking into consideration as well my input numeric component, and just you can add your own type of logic into it. So if I go ahead and jump into it, you see that you'll have to implement the interface, the control value access interface, and once you do that, as long as you implement this interface, you can really do anything you want and have a fully compatible input form. Now if I actually have another one called input string, where I do other stuff. For example, I clean up characters that I know that could potentially cause problems when saving into the database, so I can remove those before the user actually submits the value. So you can create any type of component as long as you implement this control value accessor interface. For my next tip, I want to go ahead and review the directive actually that I often use in my applications, and what I call this directive is Blair Forwarder. So essentially what it does, the selector is very generic. It'll connect or hook onto all the inputs, the selects, and the text areas. Every time you, for example, you move your mouse away from an input element, you're going to fire a custom event. In this case, it's going to be input Blair event that's going to bubble up through the DOM. And by doing that, we can hook up onto this event and act on it. And I use this very, very often in my code, for example, in forms, to know that anytime when a user loses focus on a particular form, I can take action. So let me go ahead and show you an example of when I use this. So here you can see that this is my component, and inside my component, actually in the host declaration, you can see that I'm listening to a custom input Blair event. And anytime this custom input Blair event comes in, I'm going to go ahead and run my just local method called onInputBlair. And you can see that over here that when I receive this Blair event, I actually go and dispatch to the store, to the Redux store. So essentially what I have to do is I don't actually have to deal with every single component inside my form and listen to when the user moves away from that input to go and save. All I have to do is, because I've used a very generic kind of a catch-all directive that catches all my inputs, I know for a fact that anytime any type of input loses focus, I will receive this input Blair custom event. I will run my input Blair, and I will go ahead and I will save the changes to the Redux store. So it's just a very, very quick way to get your events in place without really having to worry about handling every single input in every single form field. So for the next tip, I wanted to talk about working with the DOM directly, which is totally fine. You can do that in Angular. You just need to make sure you do it in the Angular way. So you can see right here that I'm actually, through a dependency injection, I'm injecting into my constructor the renderer. and the element reference. And this is really the proper way of working with your native elements. So you can see right here that once I've dependency injected my renderer, I can invoke element, I can set values on that element, but it's all done through the renderer. I just give it the element reference, the native element, and then you can do whatever you want. So you can see some examples here where I'm just dispatching an event. So if you want to work with the DOM directly, again, make sure you do it through the renderer. This way you can ensure that you'll be able to use your application in other type of environments, for example, from server side or environments where you do not necessarily have the DOM, such as a desktop application. So in this tip, I'm going to talk about change detection. So I'm assuming you know how change detection works. Change detection, of course, I'm just dependency injecting it into my component, and I can do a mark for check anytime that I want to be able to update. The thing that I wanted to cover is that something that you may not be aware is that if you're going to develop a custom component, and this custom component is going to be consumed by other developers, and these developers are actually going to embed this component in an environment where the parent component is going to use a change detection that is not going to be the default. In other words, they're going to use an on push. It means that your component is not going to get an update because their parent component dependency injection is on push, and this can lead to problems. So what I've found is that when I develop custom components that's going to be consumed by other users, I often use change detection, and I often mark for detection. If I don't do that and somebody consumes my component and they use a strategy of on push, what's going to happen is that even though my component uses a default change detection, because the parent component uses on push, the changes are actually not going to propagate. Another option is to use zone. So what I can do right here is I can inject zone through the ng zone, and then you can do zone.run to force changes so Angular is aware of your changes. That's just another option. So in the next tip, I'm going to talk about content children. So obviously you're aware that you can pass data to your components via inputs, and you can do it imperatively. But over here, you can also pass data to your components declaratively using just your templates. So you can see that I have this component called contents heroes. And if I go into it, what I can do is I can pick up all the children. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm using the content children decorator, and I'm picking all the children up, and then I can do a for loop on them. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm passing data, but instead of passing data to my component as an input, I'm doing it declaratively in the template, which is really convenient. This will allow you to create very generic components. You can see right here that I'm displaying all the data. So this will make the consumers of your components not really have to deal with actually passing arguments, but just doing it all in the template. In the next tip, I wanted to talk about multi-slot transclusion. Essentially what you can do is you can create your own components, and you can pass in your own elements and use the particular selectors. So you can see right here that I've put in an h1 header that's not going to appear anywhere. And then for this h1 header, I put just the tag header. Over here I put body, and here I use footer. And then inside my multi-slot transcluder component, what I can do is I can pick up those particular tags using the select. So I can select the body, I can select the footer, and I can select the header. And you can see right here that since I'm not really picking this entry is not going to appear at all in any of the templates in the UI. You can see that I can see the header, the body, you can see the footer, and I'm not seeing the text that I haven't included in any of the select. In essence, you can use the multi-slot transclusion to inject multiple ng contents within a single component. For the next example, I wanted to talk about the export as, which is a really nice functionality that you can add to directives. So you can see right here that I have this pop-up directive, and you can see that I'm binding to the pop-up declaration right here. And if you look at this component, you can see that nothing special about this component. It basically listens to a click and then runs a display message. However, you can see that I'm doing export as, and what this export is allows me to do is essentially create a public interface and expose the public interfaces of this component to the template. So you can see that right here, again, I have the pop-up, and what I'm doing is when I click on it, I'm going to be able to catch that event and show an alert message, nothing special there. However, because I did the export as, I'm actually able to bind to the pop-up variable. And with that variable being declared, I can actually refer to the display message from another element. So the span element is actually able to run the pop-up of this exported as member, and then go directly into the display message which is just a public method, public interface. So let's go ahead and check it out in action. You can see that I have the h3 and the span. This is going to be the h3 over here, and obviously if I click on that, that's just the actual declaration right there, and I see the hello. But then also from pop.me, because of the export as, I have access into the main component, and I can click on that and get the message as well. In the next tip, I wanted to talk about enums. Enums are part of TypeScript and are very, very useful. You can see right here that I have the add, delete, and update, and it just saves you a lot of errors when you're actually referring to constants like this than just dealing with strings. So just I definitely recommend using enums anywhere you can. But the tip that I wanted to give you, that you can actually use enums inside template as well, that you may not realize that you can. So you can see right here that I'm using, this is a template, and inside the template I'm actually referring to the enum and the value. And the trick is that all you have to do in order for you to use enums inside your templates is that you need to make sure that you have a private member, and then you want to map the enum into this private member. Once you do that, you'll be able to access the enum inside your template. And of course, you can also use it inside your code as well. So this way you can use your enum in both places. So when you're developing an Angular application, normally you would develop smart components and dumb components. Smart components understand how to work with specific data models, they know how to work with your Redux store, and so on. And dumb components really don't. They just get their data passed into them, and they know how to display it. That's it. But if you strictly follow that model, you'll find that you need to create a lot of different components. So what I like to do is create my dumb components, but make them just a little bit smarter so they're not completely dumb. What I do is I give them this process field input, and what I can do with this process field is pass in a higher order function, way of processing the data that it received. So in this case, if you look at my process field, you can see that in this case, for example, I'm passing get customer name. So this simple grid data component doesn't know anything about get customer name. All it knows is that when it receives its data, it knows that it's going to modify the item data using the passed in function of get customer name. And if we take a look at this function get customer name, you can see that it's a getter, and you can see that it's a higher order function. It basically returns a function, so it will receive the model, the data model, from within the actual DOM component, and then it'll do its logic and just return a name to the actual component, the DOM component. So let's go ahead and jump into the actual DOM component, and you can see that all it has is this input, and the input is process field, as you can see right here, and it is a function. The function is a store model, which is what I use for all my models, and it'll go ahead and process whatever function it gets received and assign that to the internal value, which is the value that it's actually going to display in the UI. We are taking DOM components and we're making them a little bit smarter so we can reuse them by passing in a function that gets processed differently on a case-by-case basis. So ngrx is kind of like the de facto way of using stores with Angular. And if you use ngrx, I'm sure you're familiar with effects. Effects allow you to do side effects for actionable typed events. And so over here, I have a search Spotify type API, and it uses the API of Spotify to do a search, and I wait for the result to come in. But one thing that's really cool that you may not be aware of is that you can actually wait for additional actionable typed events and operate on these events even during the stream. So what's going to happen here is that I'm waiting for this HTTP call, and if this call takes a long time, I actually can fire, or rather dispatch, another typed action, and over here take until will actually stop this search result, essentially do a side effect on the side effect and cancel out of it and then do something else. So the ability to mix those type of actions within the stream is very powerful, and it's something that I often use when using ngrx effects. Next, I'm going to cover a couple of RXjs operators which I find very useful and I just don't hear enough about. The first is forkJoin, which essentially is promise all. So you can see it's just going to wait for all the observables to complete before it's going to continue onto the stream. At that point, I'm actually going to continue with the observable. So forkJoin is something very useful, which I often use when I'm doing multiple server calls. Another really cool RxJs operator that I just don't really hear about very often is let. Essentially what let will allow you is just pass in a higher order function, and so you can reuse this code over and over. So pass in a value, whatever value you want. Here I'm just passing true, but you can pass whatever you want, and then the function that comes back from it, the return function, will receive the observable, and then you just work on that observable like you normally do and return the values. And one of the other benefits of using let is that if you have a long operator list It's just a lot easier to just look at a function name rather than a whole bunch of code. So when you come back to the code in a few months, I just look at this and I know exactly what's happening. I don't have to go and dive into it and see what it does. So it's just a way of cleaning up your long chain. Let will do that for you. Next, a quick tip on Angular CLI. So if you use Angular CLI, you'll have an Angular-CLI JSON configuration file where you can actually specify all the styles, all the CSS style files. These will get bundled into your final project. So it's just really easy to include your font awesome, bootstrap, just all the styles that you're going to use in your project. Same goes for your scripts. You can put your jQuery, bootbox, all these NPMs will get included and bundled into your final projects. So it's super easy to include both styles as well as scripts that use global variables such as jQuery in your project. Next, I wanted to cover the ngZones. So what happens with ngZone is that Angular uses it to monkey patch all the asynchronous calls. This way, Angular knows when to run change detection. However, sometimes you want to run certain things outside Angular. For example, if you're doing some heavy operations or if you're doing a lot of rendering or canvas work, you don't want Angular to go and every time you click, for example, to go and re-render the entire application and every single component. It just doesn't make any sense and it's just expensive operation. So what you can do is you can simply include ngZone through your constructor, as you can see right here, and then you can simply run anything you want, and this will allow you to bypass the Angular detection system. So now that we understand how ngZone works, we can actually create a selector, a directive that's going to be very generic. It's called outside event handler. And anytime we add this to any element on the DOM, what's going to happen is that we'll be able to capture that event and be able to simply notify whoever wants to listen to it. So what's going to happen is that we're going to have an input here that by default is going to be a click, but of course it's going to be a change or whatever input that you pass in. And what's going to happen is that anytime there's, for example, a click, we're going to be able to capture that. We're going to be able to run outside Angular. So Angular is not going to be notified on this click. And then we can actually manually notify using an output to whoever is interested in listening to this particular event. Essentially, this is a way of just bypassing the Angular detection system using a generic directive selector. Now, this video would not be complete without me covering my favorite editor, which is going to be WebStorm. It's an awesome IDE, really gives you a lot of functionality. Some of the things I really love about it is, number one, is the fact that I can very easily debug Node.js remotely on the server over SSH, which is awesome and it's really useful. Has first-class debugger for Node.js. Some other things are live templates. I use them all the time. You can see right here that I use different live templates. So, for example, if I want to go ahead and do a console, or if I want to do a component really quickly, I don't necessarily have to use ngCLI. I just have all my live templates that do all the stuff that I often use, and it's all in there for me. So live templates are awesome. Some of the things I also love about it, the fact that it has this quick NPM integration, gulp integration, whole bunch of other stuff. So automatic synchronization, automatic FTP and uploading. Another really cool thing is a terminal. So I have a built-in terminal right here. It always opens the directory that this project is in, so make it really convenient. If I work in multiple projects, it just opens the directory. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I use cygwin and cmder, so I got all the goodness. Linux bash, and then of course then I would have all my aliases. So just by typing D, I can go ahead and generate a project. So created all the aliases. So again, terminal in WebStorm is really convenient. Some of the other things I like is just be able to add bookmarks very easily, so I can come back to them later. I can go over here to my favorites. I can see all my bookmarks that I can jump to. I have all my breakpoints, all my favorite points. You should jump between different locations in your files. You can very easily open multiple files side by side. Just makes it a convenient editor. So next I wanted to talk about trackBy. So obviously when you're developing Angular components, you want to make those components as efficient as possible, and on push is a great change detection. And when you set your component to be on push, you're not going to re-render your component all the time, only when it receives new data from its inputs. But another way that you can actually improve on performance is using trackBy, as you can see right here. So what trackBy does is essentially allows the developer to decide when a new item in a for loop should be re-rendered. If you don't provide the trackBy, every time new data is provided, Angular doesn't know any better and has to re-render the entire list. But if you can actually provide your own trackBy function that provide the actual ID that you would consider the primary key for that particular list, what's going to happen is that Angular will use that ID to decide if it needs to re-render a particular item in the for loop. So if you provide the same ID over and over, Angular will be smart enough to say, okay, well, there's nothing new here and I don't need to re-render this. And if there's a new ID, well, something has changed. And you want to be able to work with immutable data. Over here, if I looked at my trackBy function, which is called identity, you can see that all that I do is I simply return the ID of the particular item for every item in the loop. And Angular will be smart enough to know if it needs to redraw each item or not. So for the next tip, I wanted to talk about creating a library for your Angular projects. When I work on my Angular projects, I often find that I keep on using the same components over and over. And what you can do is you can just create a shared library and essentially create a GitHub repository and then share this library among all your different projects. So you can see that you can actually follow this ng-mslib from the path right here and use the same pattern that I've created. There's a couple of really good links here on information on that, on how to create Angular packages that you can reuse throughout your different projects. One of the things that you're going to want to do is you're going to make sure that you have your index.ts in your source directory. This will allow you to export your modules, your components, and libraries directly from this library, this shared library. And once you do that, you'll be able to simply import from this one path all the different libraries, components, and modules that you want to use in your project. Now, it is recommended practice to use modules. You can export your components inside your module. You can see right here that I'm exporting using the actual barrel. The barrel is just an array of the components that I use, and I'm setting my declarations. Using modules is beneficial because, first of all, you can share it among multiple modules inside your application. Also, the other benefit is that by setting this declaration over here, I don't even actually have to set it inside my application declarations. So you can see that if I switch on my application, you can see that over here I'm importing from this single path both my ngMslib as well as my component. But you can see that my component is actually grayed out. I don't even actually have to import it since I'm not using it. I'm not putting it in my declarations because it's already been declared at the module level that I'm importing. So definitely use modules when you're sharing libraries among multiple projects. So I went ahead and switched to the actual project, the ngMslib, and you can see that it has a pretty extensive npm configuration. The most important one is the complete, which really does everything. It uploads the entire project to npm. It uses the Angular compiler. It does a gulp bump, so it actually increases the version number, so there's no error when you upload to npm. So this is definitely something you want to check out in this, again, ngMslib project. This configuration right here is kind of like the secret sauce on how to create a reusable Angular package. So in the next tip, I wanted to show you how easy it is to wrap an existing library and use it in both pipes and directly in the controller. So I've created this wrapper called string.js pipe that wraps around the very popular string.js library that has a lot of really cool string operators. And you can see over here that I'm using it directly as a pipe inside my template. You can also see that I use it often just directly inside the controller. So string.js inside my component, really. String.js, the value, and then boolean to number. You can see that if I run some IntelliSense on it, I have some pretty neat commands that I can run. I got the capitalize operator, count, dasherize, just a lot of really cool stuff. So I get all this power everywhere inside my Angular. Now you'll notice that some of these operators require arguments. So you can see right here that if I run through the IntelliSense, you can see, for example, contains requires a string. And we have full support that for templates as well. Let's go ahead and switch to our templates. You can see over here that I'm running the string.js pipe, and then I actually pass in the arguments. And if we jump into it, you'll see that what I do is I specify the operator, and then I can pass in the arguments over here in the array. So you get the same functionality in both the component and the template. So as you can see, what I did was create a wrapper, a pipe wrapper around my favorite string.js library. So you can create this for any library that you like. If I switch over here, you can notice that when I call my mslib module for root, and I simply make the library global. So ngMslib globalize string.js, make sure that I expose the string.js library directly on the window object. I also provide a definition file, so I get all the beautiful IntelliSense. And last but not least, I make sure that I expose it through my barrel, and then I export it so the Angular application importing this module can use it directly in the templates and the components. And while we're on the subject of pipes, I just wanted to also explain that you can pass multiple arguments to pipes. So you can see right here that I do let pair of pairs. Pair is going to be an object. That's why I'm putting the brackets right here. And then I only want to display it if it has a customer ID. So I do class hidden. So it's going to be either a truthy or a falsy. I pipe it through my own custom filter pipe equal, and I pass in the customer ID to my local function called filter content, which is just a private method on the actual component. I receive the store model. I check if there's a customer ID, I map it to a string and return it. So being able to pass multiple arguments to a filter pipe is pretty cool. And if you want to see the implementation of the filter pipe, you can see it right here. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory. For the next tip, I wanted to talk about the versions. As you can see, I'm displaying here both my application version as well as the Angular version. And that's really simple to do. All I have to do is inside my application, I grab the version from Angular. So you can see I grab it right here from Angular core. And once I have that, I assign it to a variable and I select the full property and I assign it. And then what I do is I simply put it directly in my template. So as simple as that. And to do the same thing for my application version, this is actually a pretty cool trick. What I do is I can import the entire package.json file. So if you look at my package.json, you can see that I have the version number right over here. So I actually import the whole file into my package.json variable, and then I access any property. In this case, I'm accessing the version property, put that into a variable, and then directly into my template as well. Also, I use gulp bump, which is really cool gulp extension. And if you look at it, you can see that it automatically will update my version number. So if I go to my gulp, simply double click on it, you'll see the number increasing over and over. So when I release, I don't have to worry about the number. It automatically does it for me. Now, if you are going to import the package.json file just like I did, make sure that you tell TypeScript about it. Otherwise, TypeScript is not going to be happy. So just declare a module, and you can declare it that anything.json with any values and default values are going to be allowed, so you don't get any complaints from TypeScript. So the next quick tip I wanted to cover is the deep CSS selector. So you can see right here that I'm using the really cool ngPrime drop-down component. However, this component has a little bit of styling that doesn't work for me. I actually need to modify the caret down. So what I can do is I can actually reach into it using the deep selector, which you can see right here. So essentially what this will do is it will reach out to any child component of my component at any level, and if it has this font awesome caret down class, it'll go ahead and modify the position and the pixels -5 pixels. So this is a really handy selector to when you want to reach into your child components and modify them regardless if they use a shadow DOM or not. So in this quick tip, I just want to cover a couple of quick things. First of all, I'm using this loading component pretty much everywhere in my application. All it is just an SVG based graphic that shows a loading bar, and it's just it looks really good and it's really easy to use. All you have to do is go ngIf. In this case, if my stations are 0, then go ahead and show loading. So again, in any condition that something's happening, you can show this loading component. And here you'll see it in action in just a second. I don't know if you saw it, it was really quick. I'll go ahead and reload one more time. So actually here's the component right now. And the second tip I wanted to cover is the ability to configure this station using the style tag. So if I go ahead and look into this component, you can see that it actually received its style configuration, and it's right here. I do a set style and then I set it to a local variable. And what happens here is that I use the ngStyle on the component to configure this component externally, because what this allows me to do is pass any object with any settings, any CSS styles, and ngStyle will simply style it. So if you wanted to allow your consumers of your component to configure it externally, they can just pass in. In this case, I'm just passing a margin, but of course they can do colors, fonts, anything you want, you can style. So in this quick trick, I wanted to show you that you actually have the ability to know if you have any subscribers to your observer. So you can see right here that I have an output, just a regular standard my event, and it has an event emitter. So all this is pretty standard stuff. And from the outside, you can see that I'm binding to this event to on my event, and I'm going to run this method do something. So this is all normal, really nothing special. But what is kind of cool is that if you look at my template, I actually have an ngIf statement. So I'm only going to show this h2 element if I have at least one or more listeners to this particular observer. So if somebody from the outside subscribes to my event, only then I'm going to go ahead and show this h2 element, which is a pretty cool trick, as it allows you to hide or display elements only if they're being subscribed to. So in this quick tip, I wanted to cover the difference between ngValue, putting it in brackets versus not. So if you don't put it in brackets, you're telling Angular that this pair right here is going to be a string. But if you actually put it inside brackets, you're telling Angular that this pair of the pairs is going to be an object. So it's going to unwrap it for you and you'll have full access to the object and the properties of it. And then you can actually work with it, as you can see right here. And if you want to see what this pair is, I can actually jump over here. You can see that it's going to be an immutable list. Obviously, these are going to be objects and not strings. So in this quick tip, I wanted to show you how you can extend your Angular application with additional libraries. So in this case, I've installed npm install jQuery, and by doing import everything as jQuery right here, I'm able to start using jQuery globally in my application, and everything is great. However, TypeScript is not happy because TypeScript doesn't know anything about jQuery. So of course, you'll need to do npm install at types, as you can see right here, at types, and have the definition for jQuery. So that's all pretty simple stuff. However, sometimes I find myself wanting to install jQuery extensions, and these extensions do not have any typings since they're not really popular. One of them, for example, is the jQuery model. So all you have to do, and normally what I do, is I create a custom definition file, typings.d.ts, where I put all the obscure typings just in this one file that I can include in my project. You can see that I declare my module right here for XML2JS, which doesn't have a definition file. Same thing for my JSON modules. So I can import JSON files. And what I wanted to show you is that I can actually extend the jQuery interface. So sure, I've installed the typings for jQuery, but then I can actually extend it, letting TypeScript know that I also have a model extension of type jQuery model that extends the jQuery plugin. So this way, TypeScript is happy and I can continue coding. So for the next tip, I wanted to show you how you can create a module that you can pass components to and add these components to the analyze for entry components. If you're going to create components on the fly, you have to tell Angular that these components are going to be part of your final release. Otherwise, Angular is not going to know that it needs to include them in webpack and in the bundle. So you have to use the analyze for entry components, as you can see right here. But one cool thing you can do is you can actually create a module and just add a static member, in this case, just with components, and you can give it a list of components. And so when you do that, you can create a module that you can pass the components, and you can see me doing it over here. So I go grid module with components, and I give it 3 separate components. These components will automatically get injected into analyze for entry components since I'm using the multi-true. And so Angular will know to use these components in the final release. So this will allow for dynamic creation and AOT compatible components with the analyze for entry components, and Angular will know to use them. So that's a pretty cool trick. So for the next tip, I wanted to talk about the store model. This would be by far my favorite tip. And if you're going to develop an Angular application, I couldn't stress enough how important it is to use immutable.js. It will change the way you develop. It'll make sure your state is bug-free because you always are going to be receiving a new version of the state. Doesn't matter if you're using pure Redux or ngrx, either way would be just fine using immutable.js. And this is a store model that wraps around immutable.js. Now, instead of me going on and explaining all this, I actually prepared a separate video specifically for that, and you can download the video right here. This is the path, so just go to YouTube, and this is the ID of the video, and make sure that you install immutable.js, check out the documentation. But again, I can't stress enough how important it is to use immutable.js with an Angular application, and in combination with the store model, it will be very easy for you to set up, very easy for you to be able to reason about your data, and just at the end of the day, just cut down on your bugs tremendously. So I recommend you watch this video.